Okay, so today's lesson is on looking at fossils as time marches on. And what you're going to do as we go through this lesson, you're going to go ahead and fill in the blanks. You should also be able to answer some questions and maybe even fill in some blanks before the information populates. Pay close attention to the pictures that you see in this lesson because they're really interesting and helps you to understand what it is that we're discussing. So you've talked about fossils in the past. Maybe even in third grade, you looked at some owl pellets, which would be considered some types of fossils. And in some earlier years, you probably looked at some actual fossils. So now we're going to use it to help us with geologic time and understanding how our Earth has progressed and evolved throughout the years. So let's take a look. So what is a fossil and what do fossils tell us? Well, we understand that fossils are studied by paleontologists. Paleon is past life and paleontologists study past life. So obviously fossils must be evidence of past life. So it's the geologically preserved remains of once living organisms. So we know that these organisms once existed through fossil research. And fossils actually tell us and gives us some clues about a couple of things that organisms actually lived long ago. It also advises us and shows us the evolution has occurred. And when I say evolution, I mean that things have changed over a period of time. This is not exactly saying that at one time we were of humans were of ape descent, but what scientists have through research, that is the theory that they have concluded to. But evolution is what it is. It is the fact that organisms and the earth has changed. Evolution comes from the word evolve, which means changing, and that is what fossils do tell us. They're also able to provide us evidence about the Earth's surface and how the Earth's surface has changed over time. Fossils also help scientists to understand what past environments may have been like. So it gives us information about how that environment was during that time because we cannot and we were not there. So it gives us some clues. All right. So how is a fossil formed? They're formed in a couple of different ways. One, well, I shouldn't say in a couple ways, but this is the process, and you're not writing anything right now. Just pay attention. The first part is sediment. So here, an animal is buried in the sediment, such as like volcano, silt, and then shortly after, the animal dies. Its bones are protected from rotting because of the layers. The layers is a preservation for the bones. Then the layers continue, so more sediment is placed upon the earth and it accumulates, giving us the rock layers. And it's above these animal remains that it set there. And then minerals, such as things like silica, which is a compound of silicon and oxygen, they slowly replace the calcium and calcium phosphate in the bone. So therefore, it's more preservation. And then the movement of tectonic plates or even a giant rock slab that makes up the Earth's surface, it lifts up the sediment and pushes the fossils closer to the surface. So these were originally buried down within the surface. Now sometimes you dig them, not sometimes, the paleontologists have to dig them up, but this is what happens. And then 4 will be the process of erosion, where there's rain and wind that blows away the top of the Earth's surface or layers, and eventually erosion or people, like paleontologists, will dig up the fossils and they become exposed of these remains, and that's how they're actually formed and how we get access to them. All right, fossils can be found in a couple of different areas. One, they can be found in rock. So here is an example of 2 types of fossils that were found in rock. They can be found in amber, and we'll talk about what amber is in a little bit. They also can be found in asphalt, which is like the roads and things of that nature. And they can be petrified. and not, that doesn't mean scared, but we'll talk about that as well. There are five main types of fossils. Notice I said main. One is petrified fossils. And petrified fossils are the fossils where the wood literally turns into stone. Now, petro was one of our Latin words from the past. I'm sorry, Greek words, I apologize, from the past. And petro actually means, you should be able to figure that out from your words, and you should have said rock or stone, because this is an actual fossil where the wood literally turns into stone. The other type is molds and casts. Now for molds and casts, this is a fossilized impression. So the mold will be the imprint and the cast will be the actual covering of the organism. Then you have the carbon films, which you see a picture here. And carbon films are the coating, which consists of predominantly of the chemical element carbon. That's why it's called a carbon film. And then you have your trace fossils. These are things that scientists can trace, and these are geologically preserved evidence of animal activity and movement. So it gives us an idea that there has been some movement and some activity from and how the organism acted and migrated or moved around within that time, and what the organism did. These are what trace fossils give us, so it gives us a track record. And then we have preserved remains. So let's take a look here. Trace fossils are fossils that help us to determine the size, speed, and movement. There are three types of trace fossils. So one that would give us idea on the size and the speed of the organism and the movement. This would be called tracks. Tracks are trace fossils because we can see the actual embedded footprints in rock or in areas, and the footprint will help us determine how big that organism is. The distance between the footprints will help us determine how fast that organism moved or how the organism moved. And of course, then the footprints also tell us how the organism moved, if it had a tail, if it was slothly, rapid movement. Another type of trace fossil gives us information about the shelter of the animal, because it's a shelter made by animals buried in sediment, and these would be called burrows. Now, meerkats make burrows where they are underground, so an organism in past decades would have created some type of shelter, and that shelter becomes fossilized, and that's a trace fossil because it gives us an idea on how where the animal lived and how the animal lived. Another trace fossil are preserved animal poop, and this also helps us determine the environment. It's called coprolite, kind of like crapolite. But this is important information because it will tell us, what the organism ate, and that gives us an idea on other organisms around. It will also tell us what type of plants were there because we can, dig in and find some information about this. Now, this is not your hardened poop that you find, in the grass neighborhood from cats and dogs or birds. This is, fossilized. It's been there over time, but still through examining this, we would be able to get information about the environment, and it also could give us information about the organism and even the size. You got some really big coprolite, then obviously that may have come from a larger species. Smaller coprolite, then we know that it was a smaller species. All right, so then you have the preserved remains, which we just mentioned within the five types. But the preserved remains, for this, there are some organisms that get preserved in or close to their original state. And here are some ways that this can happen. So it's preserved, meaning it didn't change over time. In amber, that's one thing that we talked about. Now what amber is, it's an organism such as an insect that has been trapped in some tree sticky sap, and it dies. And it gets covered by more of that stuff. and it ends up sealing the insect inside, and it hardens into what's called amber, which allows us to see what that organism, looked like. Then you have tar, and this is where an organism like a mammoth is trapped in a tar pit and then it dies. The tar will soak into the bones and stop the bones from decaying, so it's another preserving of the organism. And lastly, there's ice, and even the woolly mammoth, it would die in very cold regions, and its body is then frozen in ice. And we all know that when we put things in the refrigerator or the freezer, it's to preserve our food. And in these cases, this is extremely cold, so it preserves the organism, and it even preserves the hair, which is important because now we have even more information about the organism. All right. Fossils also help us to interpret the past because we have that information, and now we can make sense of what happened in the past. Marine fossils can be found on mountaintops, and what exactly would that tell us? That would be an indication that the location was a different environment. If it's on the mountaintop, at some point that could have been underwater in the ocean because we're finding marine fossils on top of land or on a high mountaintop. And fossils also help us to understand history has changed um, over time. So it shows us the changing of organisms. Now, what are scientists trying to determine by studying relationship between fossils? So a fossil in deeper layers as opposed to a fossil in that's very similar in a younger layer. Well, there we'll be able to see how life has changed over time. And in the picture here, you can look at, if you look at the elephant species, it could show us possibly how that species has changed, over time. Evolution. We then use fossils to date the rock. So not only are we digging in the fossils to understand how it's changed, we're also looking to see how old the rock layers are to determine how old the organisms are, how far back they live, how long has the change occurred, and even how old our Earth is. Now, what types of fossils do we use to establish the age of a rock layer? And we use these fossils because they're only found in one rock layer, or rock layer of one geologic time. And if you look in your notes and remember anything from a previous lecture when we talked about absolute dating, scientists use a specific fossil found in one layer. And if you hold up your finger for the number 1, you should be able to answer this question because that finger that you're holding up is called you should have been able to say index finger, which means that the index fossil is the one that helps us to determine the age of the rock layer. Now that we are able to determine ages of rock layers, we're going to move through and talk about the divisions of time because the fossils have helped us categorize our time span or our geologic time scale and put it in divisions of time. So the largest division of geologic time means this is an eon, and we call these eons. These are the largest divisions. Then you have a unit of geologic time, which is shorter than an eon, but it includes 2 or more periods, and we call these eras, so during specific eras. And then there's a unit of geologic time where eras are divided longer, and they're longer than epochs, but they're divided. And if you notice in an era, it means 2 or more periods, so these are periods. And then the last division of time is a subdivision of a period, so these are called epochs. And we're going to break these down on a geologic time scale so you have a picture that looks like this. Now, if you notice, the larger division of time are located here. These are your larger divisions, and you know that those are eons, so make sure you fill those in. Now let's talk about these eons a little bit one by one. First you have the Phanerozoic era eon, and this is 543 million years ago to the present. And here at this time, the rock and fossil record mainly represents this eon, which is the eon in which we live. So this is our current eon. And you have the Proterozoic eon, which is where the first organisms with well-developed cells appear during this eon. The Archean eon is the one where the earliest known rocks on Earth formed. And then the Hadean eon is only the only rocks that scientists have found from this eon are meteorites and rocks from the moon. So that dates way back to the beginning of the Earth, because it is said to be that our Earth is 4.6 billion years old. All right. So moving on, we know that the next subdivision is the next unit of the time scale, and that's here. And these would be your eras. And then your eras are consisted of two or more of these, which be your periods. And then your this next section are subdivisions of periods. And there you have your epochs. And notice that it breaks everything down in millions of years on the scale here. All right. Well, this concludes our lesson. If you're interested, then go ahead and visit the website so you can look at different songs that have been created for your review to help you retain and understand the information. And if you missed any other lessons, then go ahead and view the website for that. All right.